Hello, I'm Terry David Mulligan, and this is Mulligan Stew, the podcast, music, film, food, and wine. This particular episode involves film, the Jack Reacher series, starring Tom Cruise. If you didn't know, there's a lot of Lee Child in Jack Reacher, and Lee admits to that. I mean, he's a tall guy, tall and skinny, with, according to his publicist, an appalling diet and a refusal to exercise. He took law in university, but he ended up in television for like 18 years as a director. Unfortunately, he was fired when he was 40 years of age. He was a voracious reader, so he decided to write a book. He bought $6 worth of paper and pencils and sat down to write a book called Killing Floor. It was the first of the Jack Reacher series and was an immediate success. Anyway, Lee Child is not his real name. Lee Child is one of the most successful authors in the world. Just ask Forbes magazine. The Jack Reacher series by Lee Child is a billion-dollar brand published in 49 languages and 101 territories. With well over 100 million books sold, the series has commanded over $1 billion in global sales. It's the strongest brand in publishing, quote-unquote, Forbes magazine. But what it really is, it's a connection to Lee Child, the writer. Jack Reacher is simply one of the most amazing characters that has ever come off the page, for me and for many. We eagerly await the next novel. The 24th is right around the corner. I discovered Jack Reacher, the character, about book 8 or 9 or 10. And when I realized what I had stumbled across, I went back to 1 and worked my way up. If you read 24 and it's the first time, go back to the beginning and watch the development of this amazing character. He's a guy, Reacher, who's 6'5", carries no more than a toothbrush and maybe some money in his pocket, not much else. Slowly along the way, you realize that he has no family really to speak of. A long-lost brother, who we're going to talk about with Lee Child. He might jump out the back of a pickup truck in the middle of nowhere and just decides which direction he wants to go. And he goes, he puts his hands in his pockets, and off he goes. And when he has finished wiping out the thugs in the town, or wherever he happens to be, he moves on. He doesn't settle down. He's not your next-door neighbor. He's Jack Reacher. And here's the ongoing dialogue that Jack Reacher fans, Lee Child fans have, and that is, how can Jack Reacher, who is 6'5", and has knuckles that scrape the floor when he sits in low chairs, how can that man be played by Tom Cruise, who is, 5'8", 5'9"? How does that work? That's one of the questions we're going to ask Lee Child. Here's a compelling conversation with Lee Child.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm Terry David Mulligan. I'm Canadian on Vancouver Island.
Well, we're a long way apart. I'm in London right now.
Thank you for the book, for Jack Reacher. Here's the thing that I can admit to you now, that I have read all of the books, and then I give them a year, and then I go back and read them again. It's kind of weird.
Awesome. You're my favorite kind of reader.
Well, I take great pleasure from it, but I've also, I was stepping very warily about how Hollywood would handle this character as created by you. Did you have those same concerns?
I kind of did, but I also kind of didn't, because as a book writer, a lot of book writers get very nervous about it. The traditional question they ask is, what are they going to do to my book? And, of course, if you think about it logically, the truth is they don't do anything to your book. Your book remains there unchanged. And I used to make that point to people when the first movie came out. I would say, it came out last night. Everybody saw it. I took the book down from the shelf this morning, and all the words are still there. None of them have changed. The book will always live on. It's not replaced by the movie. The movie is a parallel version. It's a version on the side. And so that if the movie was no good, it doesn't change the book. It doesn't hurt the book in any way. If the movie is good, then it's like an extra bonus. So I was really the least worried person about it. I felt fine. I wanted them to do whatever they wanted to do.
After the first film had come and gone, and then Never Go Back became the next project, what did you learn what did the filmmakers and you yourself learn from that first experience, and how Jack Reacher traveled to the screen that was applied that made this a better film?
Well, I think the really significant thing was very early on when the new director of the second movie, Ed Zick, he made an analysis or a comment. He said, this is not so much a book series as an anthology,
yes,
a collection of different stories. Certainly they all feature the same guy, but the stories are sufficiently different that you can treat them, each one, as a standalone project. And that I thought was a very smart comment, because it gave him tremendous flexibility to not have to slavishly copy the first one, or he could let the first one stand by itself and make the second one stand by itself, which he did. And the real main difference in the second one is that instead of Reacher being a purely lone wolf in the story, he is forced by circumstances to collaborate with two other characters who are also alpha characters, also used to being their own boss, also used to giving orders rather than taking orders.
Also female.
Exactly, which introduces a whole character dynamic that what's Reacher going to do about that? He's so used to being in charge of things, in charge of his own life. First of all, he's going to give a certain amount of personal respect to the two women. But secondly, in the case of Major Susan Turner, he's got to give institutional too, because she is actually the commander. She is the ranking officer right now. And so there was this very complex three-way dynamic. And it became fundamentally a character movie and very much an actor's movie. The three actors in those main roles had to be absolutely on top of their game. And I think that's what excited me most about it. It was like a suspense question. Were they going to do it or not? I knew that I could rely on Tom Cruise to turn in a great performance. What about the other two? Were they going to nail it or not? And if they didn't, then the movie would not have worked. But as it happens, they really did. Both of those women are fantastic in this movie, and that's what carries it to the level that it gets to.
We like the fact that Cobie Smulders is from Vancouver, and she brings that to her as well. I mean, she's funny
you
too.
Bet. I mean, she was really the crucial part of this whole puzzle, and if she hadn't done it right, the movie would have failed. But she was fantastic. We love her. She's just great, and she's great in that role. I think you should all be very proud of her. I mean, she was sensational.
We're talking with Lee Child, the man who created Jack Reacher, and has given me great pleasure over the last number of years. And the interesting thing is, I started with book 7 or 8. I just stumbled across it in a waiting room, and then read backwards, and then read forwards. But I divided the series into before and after his brother Joe. Joe carried a heavy weight with me. Have you thought about, and I know that there's a prequel coming, but have you ever taken Joe, brought him back to the page?
Yeah, in one of them, which was the Enemy, it's a prequel, and Jack and Joe are together in that story. And you're right, all through the series, even though he's dead, he carries tremendous weight. He's like the eminence grise. He's the thing that Reacher never knew he had before he lost it. And it carries a lot of emotional weight. He's always in the background. And it was necessary, I felt, in the first book that Reacher be absolutely alone. You can't have that kind of drifter, loner character if he has a family around. That just doesn't work. He had to be alone in the world. So it was necessary for him to, his family to have away by that point. But I kind of regretted it because the family is fascinating. So with the prequels, I've been able to bring him back a couple of times. And with the current day books, his brother and to a certain extent his mother and father are presences in his mind, even though they're not right there on the page. We're talking with
Lee Child, who created Jack Reacher. Were you a fan of Kurosawa? Did you, growing up, did you watch Seven Samurai, Magnificent Seven, Yojimbo, Fistful of Dollars? Because you can see, Ed Zwick and Tom Cruise worked together on Last Samurai, and I have always looked for Westerns, looked for characters, looked for people like Jack Reacher who bring that same sort of honor.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that proves that this is a universal myth, because we tend to think of Jack Reacher as being a kind of American Western myth. But that, of course, was just imported from a much earlier tradition that was, medieval Europe, and before that, Scandinavian sagas and so on. And the character has existed in every culture. The samurai, or perhaps even better, the Ronin myths, the samurai that has been expelled and disowned and sentenced to wander the land without a master, that is very much a Reacher character. So it's a universal character, and it's a character that has existed for thousands of years.
And Lee, he also,
why I think people respond to him so well.
And Lee, he also leaves town. He doesn't hang around. Once it's done, he moves on.
Yeah, that is so crucial, isn't it? Isn't that important? That because what would you do with him if you stuck around afterward? The only one of those legends where the guy sticks around is the Pied Piper of Hamelin, and that's a disaster when he sticks around.
I mean, all he's got is his toothbrush, right? Reacher's got his tooth. When he changes clothes, he buys the new clothing, puts it on, throws the other stuff away. He loves his jazz and blues, as do you.
Yeah, there's a lot of me in Reacher. I think that's inevitable with any writer. We put our own interests and tastes in there. So, yeah, I love the old blues. I love the emptiness of America in the West. I love travel on buses and $20 motels. I love all that stuff.
I love that. Now, and here's the thing, I do a music show, and I'm asked from time to time how I get my 2 hours of music to flow the way it does. And my answer is, and it's true, I play the first record. As it's playing, I pick the second record, and then I pick the third as the second. And 2 hours later, I'm done. Does the same thing happen with you when you sit and you start to write on that September 1st day? Does one sentence carry to the next, and you look up and you're finished?
Yes, that is exactly what happens. You and I are obviously very similar, that I start out with the first line, and that turns into the first scene. I have no plan, no outline, no idea where it's going. It just goes by itself. The first paragraph suggests the second paragraph, which then suggests the third, and 6 months later I've got a whole book, and it's a surprise to me, just like it's a surprise to the reader. But if you do it that way, it's organic, it's natural, and it flows. If you were to, I imagine for your music show, if you were to sort of plot it out 2 weeks in advance, there would be a certain stiffness to it or a certain artificiality. It just wouldn't feel the same.
It's very true. He's Lee Child. I'm Terry David Mulligan, and we're talking about the new film that Tom Cruise is starring in called Never Go Back. It's the second film in the Jack Reacher series. Who knows how many there will be. You make the point that Jack Reacher is 6'5". He's a big man. And then when they cast Tom Cruise, who is not 6'5", I'm thinking, well, where are they going with it? How are they going to do this? How has Cruise been able to take over this character and not even be any way physically like him?
Yeah, it was a long decision, and for years we were hung up on thinking that we needed an actor who was physically identical to Reacher, and of course that's a problem because there are literally no actors that look like Jack Reacher. And then we all had a kind of epiphany and thought, well, we're not going to get that. So what we need to do is find somebody who can do the inside of Reacher. I would rather have 100% of Reacher and 90% of the size than vice versa. And Cruise is a huge global superstar, and he's a tabloid sensation and all of that stuff, but you do not get to be that unless, first of all, you're a fine actor, which he is. And therefore he was able to really understand the character and to inhabit the character, and he has the talent to put that all on the screen. So I'm completely satisfied that what we're seeing is Reacher on the screen. Yes, different than in the book, but different mediums require different approaches.
I know that Ed Zwick loved the fact that you didn't hang around looking over his shoulder to see what you were doing.
Yeah, that was important, I felt.
Well, I mean, because you probably make a different film. Can you see yourself becoming the producer?
Well, that's how I would test my reaction to it. Imagine that I was charged with doing it. Would my choices, would my decisions be different? And no, I don't think they would. I think they'd be surprisingly close to what Ed has done. The major decisions, I think, speak for themselves. And then you get into a sort of cascade of minor decisions, which have got a lot to do with physical reality. You find the location that you can find. You don't build an entire new town out in the desert somewhere. You've got to use one that already exists. And so I would agree with most of what Ed did, and I wouldn't have changed a thing.
We're talking with Lee Child, who created Jack Reacher. It hasn't gone unnoticed on this end of the world that you once again did not win the Nobel Prize for Literature this year, Lee. I'm sorry about that. But Bob Dylan did. What do you think of that?
Well, I think it is. I think two things, because I used to use Bob Dylan as an example. A very pretentious example. When people said to me, "What do I think of the movie adaptation?" I used to say, with apologies for being pretentious about it, I used to say, well, if I was Bob Dylan and my manager called to say somebody wanted to record a version of All Along the Watchtower, what would I want? Would I want somebody imitating Bob Dylan, or would I want somebody with some different imagination? Would I want Jimi Hendrix? And I think the answer is, yeah, I would want Jimi Hendrix. And in a way, Ed Spick is Jimi Hendrix with this. He has such a wide range of imagination. So I've used Bob as an example, and I'm going to have to stop doing that now. He's won the Nobel Prize because it sounds super pretentious. But I'm glad that he did. I think that it shows amazing imagination, actually, from the Nobel Committee. I was very surprised that they went that far, but really glad that they did.
He's not answering their phone calls, by the way.
I don't think he answers anybody's phone calls. And
Lee Child, I'm telling you, this is a great come full circle, because you have given me such great joy with these books. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Carry on. Thank you, man.
Thanks.
Lee Child, the man who created Jack Reacher, has made him very well known and extremely wealthy. The next Jack Reacher novel, number 24, it's called Blue Moon, goes on sale October 29th, 2019, which happens to be Lee Child's birthday. The current book out there, number 23, is called Past Tense, and it involves Reacher in another faraway place in the middle of forests and two Canadians, and they only meet at the end of the novel. I haven't seen any news yet on a new Jack Reacher film. I mean, there are 24 books they could shoot if they wished. Thank you for listening. Upcoming, we have podcasts with Matt Anderson, Joey Landreth, and many more. You can subscribe to our podcast at Spotify, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts. And please spend some of your incredibly valuable time at our website, mulliganstew.ca. Thank you.